Thank you, Rachel and Robert. Um, yeah, this is a really good opportunity. I don't get to talk to people on the mainland very often about Hawaii's birds, and most people don't really know about Hawaii's birds. Often in the past, I've given talks, and people say, I mean, after I finish with the talk, first thing they say is, "Well, gee, I didn't know Hawaii had any native birds," or "I didn't, I thought it was all parrots and whatnot." Well, it isn't. Hawaii has some very unusual, uh, 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 very unusual birds and flora and fauna. And anyway, this is what I'd like to talk about. Where this little yellow arrow is a photo of my first photo of an apple pond. And can't expect much with the camera gear from way back when. And along the way, I ended up getting a little bit better with trying to get photos with a little bit better gear. But over time, I ended up getting some really good gear. But it doesn't matter about what gear you have. What's really important is having cooperation from the birds. So here's an apapani taking nectar, and not the photo you want to show people very often. And there it is again, something else getting in the way, as the way it is with trying to photograph birds, if you've tried to photograph birds, and again, flying off the screen, or the bird trying to show you how they feel about you, that sort of thing. But inevitably you finally get the picture of what it's about. And this is an apapane, one of the native Hawaiian honeycreepers, one of about 60 species of honeycreepers. Hawaii is an interesting place. We're one of the most isolated archipelagos in the world, at least 2,500 miles from North America, and more than 5,000 miles from anywhere in the world. So it makes it really isolated. It makes it difficult for things to get here before, well, even people have a hard time getting here. But before humans traveled, or before there were even humans, um, you know, how did things get here? Well, here's the island group in itself. And here's the big island, and it's about 1,700 miles across the archipelago. The main islands, the 5 or 6 main islands, are right in through here. And I live on the big island, which is twice the size of all the other islands put together. So it's a big island. And we have mountains here. We have snow during the winter. The Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa are two large volcanoes, almost 14,000 feet. So there's a lot going on. Then you go to Oahu, which is more eroded because these are older islands. The big island is the youngest island. And then when you get all the way out to the end of the chain, you have Midway Atoll, which was one time right here, because we're moving southwest on the Pacific plate, which is like a conveyor belt, and the lava is coming up through, say, a hole more or less in the crust, which is creating the islands. So we're actually moving at about 6 centimeters per year, which is pretty interesting when you think about it. We have some of the driest places on Earth, as in Haleakala, which in some places has maybe 0 to 1 inch of rain a year, to some of the wettest, which may have several hundred inches of rain a year. So, and then everything in between. So we have some very diverse habitats. These amazing habitats support some really strange species. We have a carnivorous caterpillar. When you think of caterpillars, what do they eat? Okay, they eat everything in my garden. But in Hawaii, we have, I believe it's the world's only carnivorous caterpillar. It actually catches insects and feed on those. We have a stinkless stink bug. Weird, but that's the way it is. And we have the happy face spiders, which are pretty unusual and pretty interesting. We have the Vikiu bug, which lives at 14,000 feet, or close to 14,000 feet, on the slopes of Mauna Kea. And it's the only place in the world that it's found. And it feeds on detritus, insect detritus, that's been blown up there. I mean, it's amazing how something like that could evolve. We also have some amazing plants. We have the only bird-pollinated geranium in the world. We have the Lobelia family, which is found all over the world, but we've got many different species of Lobelias. And if you go up to the higher elevations, there's the silver swords, which sort of look like yucca, but they're actually related to sunflowers, and they're actually silver. Pretty amazing plants. In Hawaii, the tree snails evolved into almost 1,000 different species of snails of varying colors and whatnot, many of them which are extinct right now. And then the birds. We have an amazing array of birds. So where did these things come from? Well, I call it the 3 W's: wind, wings, and waves. That's the only way that things got here in the past. Seeds blown in on the wind, seeds carried with birds, they're migratory birds or seabirds or something, and then things that flowed in on the waves. But this in the past were the only way that things could get here. And actually, they're still the only way that things can get here. Wings being airplanes, waves being boats, and wind, well, wind is still the wind blowing seeds in from time to time. So just looking at the Lobelia family, I don't know if you're familiar with Lobelias, but I think Lobelias on the mainland, there are some little things that get to maybe 6 inches or a foot tall or so. But in Hawaii, from one colonization from Africa about 14 million years ago, we now have 5 endemic species and about 140 species of lobelias, of which most of them are bird pollinated. If you look at the flowers on the plant on the left-hand side bottom, you can see it's curved, just like the bird bills, and the same thing with the Claremontias on the right-hand side. So birds are very important for the native plants. We only have one land mammal, and which is a small bat called the Opea or the Hawaiian hoary bat. It's still around. It's endangered. It's an insect feeder, and it's a small single. They don't live in colonies in caves or anything. They're just found as singles up in trees and whatnot. We also have, mainly because mammals never got here, grazing mammals. I mean, there are no native deer, sheep, goats, pigs, horses. They were all introduced. So we have all these weird plants that lost their defense mechanisms because there weren't any mammalian grazers. If you look at the left here, we have the Akaava, which is a green briar, but has no briars, has no spines. The native raspberry has no prickles. We have 28 species of nettleless nettles. That's nice. And then all of our mints, 54 species of endemic mints, and all of them are mintless. What can you do with a mintless mint? I don't know. You ever had mintless mint tea? I bet you have. Hot water. Anyway, mintless mints. But as I mentioned, native birds are really important for native plants. About 60% of Hawaii's plants, flowering plants, are either pollinated or dispersed, their seeds dispersed by native birds. So if we didn't have the native birds, things wouldn't be as they were, as they evolved over millions of years. Now we've got what's called the Hawaiian Honeycreeper family, the Drepenidinae. It's actually a subfamily. I don't know, some people call it a tribe, but they all evolved from a small finch-like bird that got here about 5.5 million years, just before I was born, evolved from a finch-like bird that got here from Asia and evolved into almost 60 different species of Hawaiian honeycreepers, with an amazing array of bill form and color. And anyway, they were or are an amazing family of birds. And most people, when they come here, that's what they want to see. But because of extenuating circumstances, because of humans, we've lost many of these birds. If you go look at the very left-hand corner here, we've got the Ula'ai havani, which disappeared in the early 1800s. And as you can see, we lost a lot of birds later in the 1800s. Interestingly, R.C.L. Perkins was a Brit who came to Hawaii to study insects and ended up collecting a lot of birds that had never been seen before. And he discovered these three finches, the greater koa finch, the Kona grosbeak finch, and the lesser koa finch, all in an area in Upper Kona, came back 3 or 4 years later, and they were all gone. They were all extinct. This was 1890, he was there. 1894, I think it was, he came back, and the birds were gone. Why? Because cattle had eaten the forest. Akialoa disappeared in the 1960s, as did the Kakawahi'e. The o'u, I got to see the o'u in 1989. I believe it was the last sighting. And then the po'ouli, which was only discovered in 1974, was gone by 2004. It's sort of a sad thing, but we may lose a few others in your lifetime, in the next few years. We also know that there were many, many, many birds. There were all sorts of flightless birds, flightless ducks, flightless geese, flightless ibis. There were a number of species of hawks and crows and owls and eagles that were here long before humans were here, but probably started to go extinct about the time the Polynesians arrived, which was about 1,000 years ago. Many of these species would have been delectable and easy to catch and not afraid of humans. And the only way we know these things existed are from the fossil records. And we find the actual bones, in many instances, in caves, or the bones buried in sand dunes, like on Maui, or in lava tubes on Oahu and the Big Island. We have some critically endangered birds. The palila, I worked on the palila project in the 1980s. There were about 10,000 palila at that time. There's only about 600 left. This bird feeds on one kind of seed, feeds on the mamane tree. Mamane is a legume, and you can see the seed pod here. And this bird is a Hawaiian honeycreeper. It's a finch-billed Hawaiian honeycreeper, and it uses that powerful bill to rip open the pods and eat the seeds. The seeds are toxic to anything else. Any other bird eats those seeds, it's toxic to them. So here's evolution at its finest. Now you can still see palila, but how much longer, I'm not sure. And like I said, they're only found in the upper slopes above 6,000 feet on Mauna Kea Mountain on the Big Island. Then we have the Maui parrotbill, or the kiwikiu, which was a few hundred birds not long ago, but the estimated population is less than 50 now. So it is declining rapidly. The akohekohe on Maui is also in decline, rapid decline, less than 500. And it's a magnificent Hawaiian honeycreeper. The colors and whatnot, and the songs. Many of the Hawaiian birds say their name, and the akohekohe is in that realm. You're walking through the forest and you'll hear this kohe, 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 kohe. Pretty neat to be able to witness that. The Akeke'e on Kauai is also known as the Hawai'i Akepa. It's in decline, as is the Akikiki from Kauai. By the way, at the end, we're going to test you on all these bird names. That's okay. Great fun. Okay, so then we have the Elepaio. The Elepaio is not a Hawaiian honeycreeper. It's a flycatcher, old world flycatcher. And there's several different species. The other two, there's 3 species. The other 2 are doing fine, but the Oahu Elepaio is in decline with less than 400 left. We used to have thrushes in all the islands. Most of them are gone now, except for the Puaiohi on Kauai, which has declined to about 400 individuals, and the Oma'o on the Big Island, which is doing fine, thank goodness. Both of these are berry feeders and seed dispersers, important for forest regeneration and recovery. On the Big Island, we have the alala, or Hawaiian crow, and it's had problems for a number of years now. There's less than 100, or 100 or less, They're all in captivity, mainly because of big problems with habitat loss. And they've done a number of releases over the past 20 years, but they have not been very successful, mainly because of the Hawaiian hawk, which has been feeding on them. They've lost their ability to what's the term? Mob the hawks. They've lost that. So because there's so few, and when they release them, they only usually release 10, 20, or 30 at a time. So things are not doing good. We've got about 95 extinct species, and 33 species that are endangered or threatened. And of these, a number of them haven't been seen in a long time. But we still have about 14 species that are stable, but still extremely vulnerable. And the reasons we'll talk about in just a minute. So yeah, what's causing Hawaii's extinction crisis? If you look in the background, I think that gives you a little hint as to what might be going on. Habitat loss. Habitat loss is still continuing through agriculture, urbanization, logging, koa. Maybe many of you have heard of koa trees or koa wood. Although koa is not endangered as a tree, its habitat, koa habitat, is in decline, and there's several species that rely on koa, several bird species that rely on koa for their livelihood. Also grazing. Grazing has been a huge issue in Hawaii ever since Captain Vancouver brought grazing animals in the late 1700s. These animals have dispersed into the forest. Now there's actually, there's grazing, commercial grazing that goes on. And then invasive weeds. All sorts of weeds have been introduced over the years that take over. Matter of fact, if you come to Hawaii, generally below about 3,000 feet elevation, you will see very few, if any, native trees, native plants. It's all introduced plants. I mean, the coconut tree, it's a signature plant of Hawaii. No. Coconuts are not native to Hawaii. But anyway, we'll look at that in just a minute. So natural communities, we look at this. All of these colors on here are natural communities. This is the way it was about the time just before human contact, about 1,000 years ago. Since then, this is what's happened. All that pink is now no longer natural communities. It's either agricultural or urban or grazing lands and whatnot. So you say, well, there's still a lot of green on there and some of the other colors. Yeah, but there's still tremendous issues going on with those. Barnyard animals, like I mentioned, Captain Vancouver in the late 1700s introduced cattle, pigs, sheep, goats. These animals went feral and are a problem to this day, feeding on native plants. Remember, I mentioned that most of the native plants have lost their defense mechanisms. So when these animals arrived, it was a giant salad bar for them. They could go out and they could eat everything. There wasn't anything that would stop them. And it's still that way in forested areas. In the protected areas to this day. Here's some feral pig damage to native forest. This is a piece of forest on the left-hand side on Maui. It's a very wet forest. So what you see are lots of ferns and mosses, and the trees are growing, and it's a great habitat, was a great habitat for po'o'uli. Po'o'uli is now gone, mainly because this is what's happened once the pigs came in. This is the same place. And this is about 4 years later, after the pigs reached that elevation and destroyed the understory. Now, the overstory is still there, but it's the understory in many instances that where insects and snails and various other things live and then make their way up into the canopy to be eaten by birds. But so it's a problem. Here's a place on Mauna Kea where the palila lives. So you look on the right side of the fence and you see Palila habitat. Now, what you see there has been grazed in the past, but it's been fenced and the animals removed. So it's coming back. But what you see on the left side is still considered Palila habitat, but no self-righteous Palila could ever live there. It's just not placed for it. Predation is a problem. Introduced rats, mongoose were introduced at one time, and feral cats. We find feral cats up at 10,000 feet. The number of seabirds nest up in the lava flows and the cinder flows or cinder cones up at high elevation, 10, 12 feet, 1,000 feet. And even though it's just barren lava, where dark ground petrels and other seabirds nest, cats are the biggest issue up there. Rats climb trees. We have 3 species of rats that are nest predators and are a huge problem. And then there's competition for food resources. We have a number of birds, forgotten now how many species, that have been introduced, but they feed on the same things that some of the native birds feed on. So that becomes a real problem. And then things like honeybees. Honeybees are not native. They were introduced. Now, we do have native bees, but the native bees are solitary bees. They're not colonial, whereas the honeybees and yellow jackets are colonial. And the honeybees feed on nectar. They compete directly with the native nectar-feeding honeycreepers. Then the yellow jackets, during certain parts of their life, feed on insects for protein. So they're taking native insects and competing with the native forest birds. So predation and competition for food resources are pretty problematic. But right now, the biggest issue is mosquito-borne diseases. Mosquitoes are not native, and the avian malaria and the avian pox are not native. Mosquitoes were introduced sometime in the 1800s and have slowly become acclimated to move uphill. When I first moved to Hawaii, I lived at about 3,000 feet elevation on Mauna Loa, and all the birds were there in the forest. By the time I left, about 10 years later, 8 years later, mosquitoes had moved in and the birds were gone. One bite from a malarial mosquito and most of the Hawaiian honeycreepers will roll over dead in about 2 to 3 weeks, 100%. So what you have is this wave of death moving uphill, wiping out the native forest birds. Pigs are one of the big problems. They knock over the native tree ferns in areas where there's high rainfall, but no puddles or anything. And the mosquitoes breed in the troughing. The pigs eat the starchy center, leaving a trough. The mosquitoes bite the native forest birds and they're gone. And then with global climate change, it's become a bigger issue. So here's a stylized diagram. Here's Hakalau Forest elevationally. Actually, it runs from about 3,000 feet to about 6,500 feet up here. So this red line is the 4,500 foot level. So you can see where no matter what we do for the lower elevations down here, it's not going to help the birds. But the birds are up here at the higher elevations. That's why Hakalau is such an important refuge for native forest birds and plants. Now, above the refuge, there's the tree line. So no matter what we do in the refuge, the birds can't go uphill any higher. In the meantime, in the last 2 or 3 years, mosquitoes have been found at over 5,000 feet, which means it's now up here. So this little line across here is becoming thinner. What's being done? Well, there's been a lot of talk. Obviously, you can't go in there and spray because you'll take everything out. I mean, you take out all the native insects. There'd be nothing for the birds to feed on. But lately, there's been a couple of programs that are still being researched. One is the use of a bacteria, and that bacteria, I don't remember exactly how it works, but it causes the males to shoot blanks, and the female mosquitoes are the ones that bite for the blood. Males don't bite. So when the males mate with the females lay dead eggs. Basically, eggs don't hatch, so you reduce the population. So the idea is to drop sterile or Wolbachia infected mosquitoes, male mosquitoes, over these areas. Let's see how that works. And this is a project that we need to sort of, I hope it goes through. We shall see what happens there. How do we know about all these birds? Well, I was involved in the Hawaii Forest Bird Survey back in the the late 70s and early 80s. And this gives you an idea of the transects that we put in. It took 3 years to do the Big Island to give us an idea of where the birds were. Prior to this, we had no idea how many birds were left and where they were found. So this whole survey was abundance and distribution. And I worked with people like this. Can you imagine working with people like this? Anyway, it's a great crew. It was a great crew. And what we found was very interesting. Before 1982, this is the protected areas, the red. The blue is where the endangered species were found. Are we doing a good job in protecting our native birds? No, 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 no. So this gives us, now we can come back, go to the legislators and say, where do we need, what do we need to protect? We've got the map that shows you what needs to be protected. And then today, or close to today, this is what's happened. So we've got quite a few more areas now to help protect native forest birds. This is Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge, and it was established specifically for endangered forest birds and their habitat. This was a result, this and the Kona Forest Unit of Hakalau Forest was specifically for the, because of the Hawaii Forest Bird Survey. So Hakalau Forest, it's a national wildlife refuge, one of 550 across the US, set aside for protection of native species. It was the first refuge set aside for specifically for endangered species and their habitat. Pretty neat, pretty neat. So what kind of birds are we protecting? Well, the Akiapola'au is a Hawaiian honeycreeper. Its population is probably about 800 to 1,000 right now. And Hakalau Forest has the highest density, mainly because of the restoration that's been going on. It's an interesting bird because you saw that bill, because it feeds on one kind of insect, on one kind of tree, on one island. It lays one egg every other year, has the longest parental care of any passerine in the world, almost a year of parental care. People say, well, no wonder it's almost extinct. But it can, it pecks with its lower bill, which I'll show you in just a second, to find these long-horned beetle larvae. These larvae, and here's the beetle on the right here. They peck into the wood, and then as you can see, this female, she's reaching into the hole with her upper bill to hook that insect and pull it out. Now, this insect is host specific to koa. So you've got to have koa in order to have Akiapola'au. So here's a little video. Let's hope it works. There we go. As you can see, the bird is pecking with its lower bill and then pulling things off and whatnot. By the way, this is the normal speed of an Akiapola'au. There he is. He's pulling out an insect, feeding on it. This is a nice male there. Okay, so I've recently gotten into slow motion video, and here's a bird in slow-mo. I never realized how much power they put into that chipping, pecking into the wood with their lower bill. It's pretty amazing. And they feed on dead and dying wood because that's where the beetle larvae are. They're in the dead and dying wood, not in the living wood. As you can see, this thing is just really, really pecking against that thing. Another endangered bird at Hakalau Forest is the alavi, or Hawaii creeper. It acts much like the brown creeper on the mainland, but it's a Hawaiian honeycreeper, and it feeds on insects while it moves up and down the bark of trees looking for insects. It's also endangered. The Hawaii Akepa, the male is day-glow orange, the female is drab gray-green with a little yellow or orange wash in the front. This bird, The tip of the bill is crossed. That's the smallest of the honeycreepers, weighs about 9 grams. And it uses that bill, that upper bill, that cross bill, to feed on micro insects in the leaf buds, not just, feeding on all kinds of insects, but it's very specific, as is most of the other honeycreepers, on what it feeds on. The EEV, our most important pollinator, is found on just about all the islands, is declining across the state, but the highest population, 50% of the EEV are found now at Hakalau Forest because of the decline everywhere. Now, this is a normal EEV feeding. When they go after, if you ate that much sugar, you'd be acting like that too, right? Look at the way it's just going to those flowers. Anyway, and then in slow-mo, you can actually see, you can't see the tongue, it's using its tongue. Its tongue is like a brush on the end, but you'll see it drinking the nectar out of the little cups on the ohia tree, which is one of our other canopy trees. That's the most common canopy tree that you'll find across the whole state, is ohia. We have a fairly common honeycreeper called the Hawaii amakihi. It's a generalist, feeds on nectar, feeds on fruit, feeds on insects, and you'll see those across the state, different species on different islands. Then the apapane, which is the other red bird. This one is the apapane. I always tell the kids it's the red bird with the white undertail coverts, or the white undies. Fairly common on most of the islands. It appears to be slightly disease resistant, which is really good, really important. So it's a fairly easy bird to see on this island at some of the middle to higher elevations. And it feeds on nectar, much like its cousin, the EEV. It's fairly fast, dipping into the flowers, taking a little nectar. And then when you see it in slow motion, going into each of those little capsules to take nectar using its tongue. Its tongue is also sort of brush-shaped at the tip for licking the nectar out of the cup. In fact, I just saw the tongue stick out there. But so a couple of different birds. Okay, so now we're out of the honeycreepers and we're into the thrushes. The thrushes, this is the oma'o that I mentioned earlier, and it's a berry feeder, and it disperses the seeds, the berry seeds, throughout the forest, helping with regeneration. A very important bird, and it's only found on the Big Island. The alapaio, I showed you the Oahu alapaio, which is endangered, but the Hawaii alapaio is doing pretty well in native forest. Fairly easy to find in the right areas. It's an old world flycatcher. Nene, the Hawaiian goose, one of the most endangered geese in the world, got down to about 25 birds back in the 1950s. And through captive propagation and nowadays protection of nest sites from predators, the population is up to about 2,500. Anyway, pretty neat to see. We have a couple of raptors, the Eo, or Hawaiian hawk. The Hawaiian hawk has a dark morph and a light morph. This is the light morph. And the pueo is a short-eared owl. It's a subspecies of short-eared owls. We do have introduced barn owls that we rarely see, mainly because they're nocturnal, versus the pueo is diurnal. So we talked about all this horrible stuff going on. So what are we doing about it? Main thing is protecting habitat. Here's a koa forest that's been grazed and in pretty bad shape. So this is Hakalau Forest, 33,000 acres. It sounds like a big area, but it's really just a postage stamp. And look at the blue lines. The blue lines are fences. 60 miles of fences. Why? Because you got to keep animals from coming in. And then as you get rid of the animals, you got to keep them from coming in. So the first line of defense is the fence line. This is an area where pigs are still on this side, been removed from this side, and you can see the difference. So 1993, all these little colored dots are indicators of how many pigs are in this area when we do pig surveys. And with control work, that's what we've been doing. you can see that we've removed the pigs from these fenced units. And the regeneration is pretty amazing. The other thing we have is lots of invasive weeds, of course. There's a non-native holly, a plant called gorse that's up in the upper elevations, blackberry, banana polka, even some grasses, like kikuyu grass from Africa, that prevents regeneration of native plants. And then probably our biggest benefit has been a guy that I hired in 1996, Baron Horiuchi. He's a horticulturist. We call him the magician. He's been running the volunteer programs and outplanting. He's outplanted, not just him, but with his volunteer program, almost 750,000 trees at Hakalau Forest. So this is what the area looked like in the late 80s, early 90s. We hired Baron, we started planting trees, and this is what the area looks like now. And what's interesting is in the previous picture, there were no birds. Now you come to this area and there are native birds all through here, which is very exciting. So in areas where we didn't do any planting, you can see over here on this side, this is just grazed by cattle and pigs. You pull out the animals because you're fencing, and look what happens. The forest comes back. Funny how it does that. We've also had a lot of endangered plants, an endangered violet, endangered mints, a lot of endangered lobelias. Cyanea shipmania, I believe, is down to one individual left in the wild, and we've outplanted about 500. So done some good things. So you know, are the birds responding to this change in habitat? This is a little complicated, but mainly look at Hakalau Forest over here. S means a stable population. Up arrows in green mean that an increasing population. So birds like Akiapola'au and Hawaii creeper are increasing. And these are for other areas where either there's no protection, nobody's doing any recovery work or whatnot. Let's pick a spot right here, Ka'u. That's where Ka'u is right there. And if you look, you see that most of the birds are either extinct or declining in population numbers. So Hakalau Forest is doing pretty well. So 1992, this is the volunteer cabin, you know, snow on the mountain. We go up there, we spend the night, we go skiing in the morning. It's always fun. No, we don't. And then 2020, you know, now you can't see the sunrise anymore because all these damn trees are in the way, you know. But it's very interesting. All for the help of thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteer hours and the research that's been going on that shows us that we're doing the right thing. We also have a lot of outreach that goes on, mostly with a lot with kids, but these is University of Hawaii students that come up to help out with various things. And then we also have tour groups that come up to watch the birds, organized tour groups, but we also have disorganized groups, but we don't talk about them. So what's the cost? The refuge budget is about $1 million a year. Seems like a lot of money, but you know, you got a lot of acreage. Thousands of hours each year of volunteers. Research costs, I have no idea. For me, I was the first biologist on the refuge. I was hired in the late 80s, retired in 2008. So it's been a big part of my time. I still go up there to help out with volunteering. I'm still up there leading tours. And so was it worth it? You bet. You bet. It's amazing to see the changes that have gone on over the years. And that's it. I'll take any questions if anybody has some questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Jack. It looks like we do have one question as of right now. This question is from Murray Parmiter. And his question is, has the construction and continued operation of the telescopes on, I'm going to say this wrong, so please forgive me, Mauna Kea, had an influence on the bird populations on the mountain?
No. There's 14 telescopes up on Mauna Kea. And they're before there's any, they're up high enough. They're above the seabird nesting areas. There aren't many seabirds known to, matter of fact, they just found the first dark-rumped petrel, Hawaiian dark-rumped petrel nest site at about 11,000 feet. The telescopes, oops, excuse me a second. So there, the telescopes are way above the forest and way above any possible problems. There's a controversy with the 30-meter telescope, which hasn't been built yet. Many local Hawaiians feel that it's just way too much. I'm not sure where that's going right now, but I know they're going to be taking down several telescopes in the near future. And so whether or not the 30-meter telescope gets built or not, I have no idea. We'll see what the courts do and whatnot in the near future.
Thank you, Jack. So we've got several compliments here and at least 2 questions. So Debbie says, fabulous, thank you. Judy says, very interesting talk. Thank you so much. Susan Joy has a question, and her question is, what time of year would be the best time to go on a guided tour?
Okay. Actually, any time of year for birding. During the summer months, the breeding season for the native forest birds is generally December through about April. So for the loudest noise, the most birds just being there, December through April is the best time. And but even this time of year, although it's very quiet in the forest, we still find all the birds. Matter of fact, as I mentioned, the redbirds, which are the most raucous of the bunch, leave and go to other areas to find nectar. But and that makes it somewhat easier to find some of the really rare and endangered species. I often get that same question from photographers, and I highly recommend January through April for bird photographers if they want to get pictures of the birds, mainly because there's a lot of shrubbery that comes into bloom below the canopy. Right now, any of the birds are up in the canopy, 60, 70, 80 feet up. Hard to photograph. But during those months, January through April, thereabouts, there's a number of shrubs that come into bloom and the birds come down at eyeball level. So it's great for photography.
Okay, so we've got several more questions and compliments. Karen says, so informative. Wanda S says, great presentation and photos, thank you. And then Marjorie has a question, and her question is, any other birds developing resistance to avian malaria?
Amakihi. What's been seen, interestingly, when we did the forest bird survey, we didn't find any of these honeycreepers in the low elevations in the southeastern part of the island, even though there's native forest that goes all the way to the sea level. But I don't know, it was about 10, 15 years ago, all of a sudden people started finding birds down there. And it was Apapane, the red bird with the white undies, and the Amakihi, the little yellow bird. Now, both of these birds have extremely large populations. So anyway, those 2 species seem to have developed some sort of immunity, I guess, to the malaria, which was great. And then what happened in 2018? That whole forest area got wiped out by the 2018 Kilauea lava flow. Took out almost all the forest. I don't know what's happened to the birds since then, but I suspect that they're in nearby forest. But the Oahu Amakihi and the Maui Amakihi appear to have also developed the resistance. And you can still find, even on Kauai, where the bird population has just plummeted, mainly because it's a low island. It's only 5,000 feet at the top, so the mosquitoes have gotten up there. You'll still find Apapane and Amakihi in reasonable numbers. So I suspect that they also have resistance to the malaria, which is exciting because we've got at least a couple of honeycreepers that might survive The others, their populations are so low, the gene pool is just almost non-existent. So they don't even have a chance to develop resistant to the malaria or pox.
Okay. Thank you, Jack. We've got a compliment here from Alex Sheriff saying, fabulous presentation, pictures highlighting the importance of acting locally. Now, Phil Phillips has a question, and the question is, where is a good place to go birding on the Big Island?
Hakalau Forest. The problem is Hakalau Forest is closed to the public, and the only way you can get in there is to basically hire a guide or volunteer when they have volunteer programs going up there. There wasn't anything for the last 2 years, but they just had this past weekend, just had their first volunteer group out planting trees. And so that's a really good way to see that. Other than that, on the Saddle Road, the Pu'u'o'o Trail, and the Kaulana Reserve are two good areas for birding. Now, you won't get any of the extremely rare birds there. You get the more common birds, common natives in that area. And that's, I mean, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, the higher elevations are some good areas. It's hard to find areas where the endangered birds are. It's just they're in very remote areas like Hakalau Forest. I mean, it's a 2-hour drive from Hilo to get to Hakalau Forest, half of which is over a pretty bad road. But anyway, those are some of the best areas for the native forest birds.
Oh, thank you, Jack.
By the
So
way,
Alan,
anybody can email me, and I'm happy to send them the where to find birds on the Big Island. I put together a little sheet that helps people to find the birds.
okay, awesome. You know what I can do, Jack, either you can drop your email here in the chat, or I can look it up here in my email, and I can drop that in the chat for everyone, so everyone has that. So we've got a compliment here from Alan Birnbaum, and he says, very nice presentation. And Karen Westerson asks, how do we contact the refuge for tours? But if I'm not mistaken, it sounds kind of like you said that contacting you directly might be a good idea.
Yeah,
Okay,
email me directly, go to my website. Now, there's several companies. I'm not the only one that does tours. If you Google, birding guides in Hawaii, Hawaii Forest and Trail, Lance Tonino, there's maybe a half a dozen people that do tours to Hakalau Forest.
Okay, awesome. Well, and I see that Robert dropped your email in there, so thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate that. Let's see. So the next question is from Sally Walters, and the question is, what is the species of mosquito? What is the species of mosquito that is the problem?
The biggest problem is the Culex. Was it the house mosquito? Culex quinque fasciatus is the one that carries the malaria for the native forest birds. And it breeds, from sea level all the way up to, well, like I said, they've been finding them at 5,000 feet, which is not good at all. We have, I believe, it's 5 species of mosquitoes, and all of them can carry various diseases, but it's the house mosquito that carries the malaria. One of the things that we feared along the way was a temperate mosquito. And lo and behold, Culex japonica shows up, which is a temperate mosquito from Japan. And that was scary. And we thought, that's it. There goes our forest birds. Well, as it turns out that japonica can't carry the malaria. So we dodged a bullet on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Our next little item in the chat here is a compliment from Phil Phillips saying, appreciated your humor throughout the excellent presentation. Thank you. And of course, Robert dropped your email address here for anyone wanting to contact you directly. And Chris Schwanz has another compliment, and that is beautiful photos, great presentation. Thank you so much. And that is all that we have in the chat box for right now. So I'll give it another few moments here for anyone who wants to drop any questions or compliments or anything. And after a few moments, I'll kind of go ahead and start closing down for the evening. So I'll just keep this open for a few more seconds here, see if anyone has anything that they would like to add.
No, thank you from all of you for the compliments, and thanks for joining me and joining us this evening. And I thank Rachel and Robert for helping to put this together. And Lowell, I didn't get to see you, but thank you. Lowell was over here. We haven't figured out. It was a long time ago, and that's how all this got together. I don't know. It must have been 20 years ago or so, maybe 15 years ago, that Lowell was here, and got to see, I believe we got to see all the birds. Hard to remember. I think there was been 3 or 4 people between him and now, you know.
Awesome. So John says, thank you for the informative presentation. And Karen is asking if the audience members will have access to the recording. Yes, and Robert just answered. It will be on YouTube tomorrow, as are all other general meeting presentations from probably the past. I mean, since for as far back as we've been recording them, which is probably the last 1.5 to 2 years, somewhere around there. So yeah, if you want to, if there's any recent general meeting presentations that you missed, definitely check out our YouTube channel for that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down here for the evening. Thank you again, Jack, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you so much to everyone who attended. We certainly appreciate it. If you are not already, please follow Fresno Audubon on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And as we were mentioning, we have also relaunched our YouTube channel. It's a great place to find this and other general meeting presentations from recent months. And we do hope that you will join us for next month's general meeting presentation, which is scheduled for August 9th. Matt Allshouse will be talking to us about the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program. So stay tuned for an announcement and links to registration for that event. And with that, thank you again, Jack. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Have a great remainder of your week and stay safe out there. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.